Hey, it's New Thought Talk. I'm your host, the Reverend Steve Walling, from the Spiritual Awareness Center located in the heart of Fresno, which is the heart of the Central Valley, which is the heart of California. And there's just a lot of heart going on here, my friends. Welcome today. I'm glad you're here. Hopefully, I'm going to have a guest join me a little bit later today, but until that happens, if it does happen, I want to talk to you about one of those things that we talk about in Science of Mind, New Thought, kind of as a sub-issue. It just very rarely kind of raises itself up to a real rip-roaring discussion, if you will, but we see its effects pervasive throughout. And that's this thing that Ernest Holmes called race consciousness. And it's a concept, I don't know if it was original to him. I don't know if he took Carl Jung's concept of the collective unconsciousness and realized that it made sense and it fit into this philosophy that we call Science of Mind. Holmes refers to it by several names, and collective unconsciousness is one of the names, but generally what he calls it is just race consciousness. And race consciousness, for a simplistic definition, is the consciousness of the entire human race. Understanding that thoughts are things, all that's been thought is out here in this collective unconsciousness, this race consciousness, and we are all subject to the influence of it. And it makes sense when you begin to look at how history of humanity has unfolded, how things have come kind of sequentially over time, they've faded, they've come back again, how people end up with certain types of thought patterns that it just seems antithetical to the individual, something that's totally opposite of who and what they are, and yet there it is. And one of those things or actually several of those things, but under the title of something that Holmes often called evil or negative thinking, is a repository within race consciousness of the idea of limitation, of disease, of judgment, and basically most of those things that we know and understand as something that limits us and keeps us separateness from our connectedness in our minds, not in reality, but our connectedness in our minds to the divine principle, which we call God or source, God as first cause, whatever. But this idea, it's there, and I'm going to read you this out of the Science of Mind. We've actually got several things I'm going to read to you, but the first thing is, the subjective mind, being the seat of memory, already contains a record of everything that has ever happened to us. These memories as a whole constitute the subjective tendency of the individual life. This tendency can be changed through constant effort and a determined persistency of purpose. And that really is how the function of New Thought, religious science, the role that it plays in our life. But he highlights here that it can be changed through constant effort and determined persistency. And we're going to come back to that because that's very important. I want to go on here, and he says, the subjective life of all people merges more or less, and this creates a subjective life of the race, or race consciousness. The collective subjectivity of all humanity, called by some collective unconsciousness, this collective unconscious contains a record of all human events that have ever transpired. We are all more or less subject to this collective thought, and since it acts as a powerful race suggestion, the sum total of all erroneous human belief binds until the individual mentally lifts him or herself above the law of averages and into the higher law of spiritual individualization. On the subjective side of our being, understanding that we're not separate from, but we're where God expressed as us, but particularly on the subjective side, the creative side of consciousness, of God, of first cause. We are wired in, if you will, with the subjective mind of the whole. And so as we go through our day, and we've talked about this, that trend of thought that we hold on our conscious mind versus the trend of thought that we hold in our subjective mind, or subconscious mind, plays a major role in how our day-to-day, moment-to-moment life experience unfolds. But things happen in our life that we seek to establish ourselves in a consciousness of day-to-day, moment-to-moment living as a spiritual being expressing in this physical plane. We find a spiritual path, whatever it is. It's not significant other than I'm speaking specifically here about a New Thought religious science, but whatever spiritual path that we come to, and we work our spiritual journey. We commit to it, that persistent, constant work. Now, work is not as tedious as it sounds when I say the word. When I'm talking about work, I'm talking about a conscious awareness of where we're at in mind at all times. And when we experience or when we express thoughts that tend to be of a limiting nature, or what Holmes might have called of an evil subjectivity, so to speak, we realize that there's no truth in that. There's no truth there, and there cannot be truth in that, because there's only one, and that one is God, and God is good, and God is love, and love and goodness on an infinite level cannot create something which is in opposition to it. So it makes sense, but yet we experience in our day-to-day life this thing called limitation or disease. And if you've experienced it, or you experienced it in your family, and particularly if you happen to come from a religious science background or spiritual life philosophy, and people have a tendency sometimes to be a little judgmental, even within our own organizations. They look at you and they say, well, you must be at fault. You brought it on yourself, because we create our own realities. And it's true, we do create our own realities. However, it's also true that our creativeness is not as individualized as we like to think sometimes, because of this effect of this thing called race consciousness. There is a belief within race consciousness that limitation exists, that disease exists, and you can go on down the line with all sorts of negative things that'll go on the list, and judgments and prejudices and so on and so forth, but they're there. It's kind of like it's a repository of that consciousness, and we're subject to it. We may not even realize, as we've come into this life in our earliest surrounding environment, when we're young and our mind is not aware and not able to fend off what's going on around us, that we may come into contact with, we may be subject to certain thoughts, certain ways of thinking that resonate within us with this thing called race consciousness. And it gets pigeonholed there in our subjective mind as a memory, as a belief. And sometimes those things aren't really good. Sometimes it may be not really that bad, but it may be limiting to us. Any way that you cover it, we get to a point later on in our life where circumstances, synchronicity, things happen. The universe kind of falls into place at a certain point. You're maybe not even aware of it, and all of a sudden you're beginning to experience one of these things in your life. And the first thing that a lot of people do that begin to question themselves is, what did I do wrong? I mean, if I'm responsible for my life, what did I do wrong? How did I create this for my life experience? And the truth be told, it's not exactly you that created it. It's a demonstration, a manifestation of race consciousness that has been a part of your subjectivity, that has begun to express in your life, because certain things have come into play that kind of make it click, if you will. I know I'm not really explaining this too clearly, but you'll see it play out in people's lives. And if we go to self-doubt, if we go to self-recrimination, we've really begun to deviate from the path that we need to be on, because what we need to do is recognize that within us, as us, there is a limiting consciousness that has developed, demonstrated, manifested in our life in such a way that in a level of consciousness that we're not even aware of, we have created a separateness between us and our source. If God is good and God is love, and I do believe that God is good and God is love, and yet I experience something in my life that is in opposition to that belief, that seems to be in disharmony with my understanding of divine principle, then the work begins with me, looking at how things have unfolded in my life in such a way that separateness has come about. My road back is not a road of claiming that I've done something or I've thought something in a wrong way, but my road back is an affirmation of life in my life, an affirmation of love in my life, an affirmation of good, and an intense desire on a conscious level, but in a feeling level, an intense desire to reconnect with my good, reconnect with God in the level that however it is that I've separated myself. It can be confusing sometimes. It can be daunting, if you will. But there is a way, there's a road, and to the extent and the level that we can do that, we will make that pathway back to the truth of who we are. And so we're going to talk more about that when we come back. I'll see you then.
Looking to remodel your home? Contact Max Meza, owner of Precise Construction. Max is the contractor with a heart who will make sure the job is done right and you're happy with the end result. Need something repaired? Call Precise Construction at 559-477-3899 or email constructionprecise76@gmail.com. Lease or buy this modern two-story Spanish-style building with private offices, open workspace, 2 restrooms, and a break room. This commercial office building is located at 10 East Olive in the Tower District. The floor plan is designed for easy conversion, and all interior walls are movable. Parking available in the rear in a fence-secure lot. Call Mike Briggs Properties at 559-486-6758 or visit MikeBriggsProperties.com. The Narrow Gauge Inn is your home away from home, with 26 rooms offering majestic mountain views, private decks, and an atmosphere of true relaxation. Located just 4 miles from the south entrance to Yosemite National Park, the Narrow Gauge Inn is the perfect base for all your Yosemite adventures. Make your reservation now at narrowgaugeinn.com or call 559-683-7720.
This segment is brought to you by Mike Briggs Properties. The recession's over. It's now safe to sell your home. Call Mike Briggs Properties.
CentralValleyTalk.com.
Welcome back to New Thought Talk. I'm your host, the Reverend Steve Walling from the Spiritual Awareness Center, located in the heart of Fresno, California. Anyway, we're talking about this concept of race consciousness and the influence that it plays in our life. To fail to realize that it's there, or to make the assumption that somehow we are not subject to it, really kind of sets us up to have things unfold in our life that we don't understand. You know, one of my phrases that I use a lot, and you've heard it on the show, is life comes at us at the speed of life, and that is true. But you see, life does come at us at the speed of life, but we're never separated from our source. We're never separated from God. To the extent that we know and believe this, and it is done unto us as we believe, to that extent, we are armored up, if you will, for whatever life may bring, that we can experience that experience at the highest possible level and find the greatest good that we can find in the experience that ultimately strengthens us and moves us forward in our spiritual journey. But race consciousness is part of life, and we cannot deny it, and we cannot turn our backs on it as we're... The reason why this is important to me, and the reason why I'm sharing this, is because if you look out at the world today, and this has been kind of a theme of mine lately, you see this immense chaos going on. And you don't have to go any further than this particular country that we live in, the United States, if you're watching the United States. And the chaos is crazy. There's a lot of good people that somehow have let themselves be emotionally caught up in it. People that know that there's a greater good, that know that there's a God that shines its good and its love on all people, that no one is subject to limitation from God, and yet we move forward in an emotional state of judgment, sometimes as if we're being controlled by something outside of ourselves. And that's when we come to this concept of race consciousness. Because these ideas do take hold, and they feel real, they feel like they're part of us. And as we bring forth this into our life, oftentimes we bring disharmony into our beingness, disharmony with our source. And as I've said many times also, that doesn't mean that we have to subject ourselves to the vagary of things that go on in the world that we have a heartfelt belief that need to be changed. But we also have to know that the commandment was to love our neighbors as we love ourselves. And there's no exception to that, even those that we have differences with. So how do we move forward? How do we create the world that we want to see? It's not so much by telling other people how they need to change in order to create the world that I think is perfect. What I need to do is create the world within myself. And when we do this, then we have to come face to face with this thing that has been an influence not only in our lives individually, not only in our lives communally, in our family, our states, nationally, and even in the world. And this is where understanding the power that race consciousness plays in our life becomes very important, at least from my point of view. So I want to read further. This is, again, from The Science of Mind. And Ernest Holmes says, race suggestion is a very real thing. Each individual carries around with him or her and has written into his or her mentality many impressions which he or she never consciously thought of nor experienced. We realize that the individual's subjectivity is his or her use of the one subjective mind. We shall see that a subjective unity is maintained between all people, and that individual mentalities who are in sympathetic vibration with each other more or less mingle and receive suggestions from each other. This is the meaning of mental influence, which indeed is a very real thing, he said. Something hooks us, catches our attention, and we begin to feel like we're moved in a direction. Now, we've talked about the concept, the Jungian concept of the shadow, or Larson's concept of beliefs that we hold in the subjective mind that we don't know that we hold. And either way you want to look at that, we're talking about our connectedness in that level of our consciousness with things that we would not consciously associate with, and yet it holds great sway and great power in the creativeness that we exert into our life. So it's not so much that we're going to be able to stop ourselves in the moment as it is that, how about we take some time and look at what the mirror is reflecting back to us. If life is chaotic, if I've got a lot of emotional upheaval in my life, if I've got angst and various things going on in my life, and it's very easy to sit down and figure this out. It takes a pad and a pencil or a pen and 15, 20 minutes, and you can create a list for yourself. And those things that are on the list that you're experiencing that are not in alignment with principle, and principle is love, peace, harmony, beauty, abundance. Principle's not things that we have prejudice towards, judgments towards, anger, angst, worry, on and on and on the list goes. If those things if they are expressing in our life, then we need to look at, in our life, if you will, as the possibility that there is something there that is expressing in our life that way. And so, instead of taking our ego and rational mind point of view, which, I'm a righteous spiritual person and I would never be or do or whatever, let's stop. And let's start with something that's called love. And we just take love for ourselves, love for our life. And anything that is not in alignment with love, we put on that paper. Regardless of whether we believe it's part of us or not. If it's part of our life experience, if that's what the mirror is mirroring back to us, we put it on that paper. Once we've got that paper, and maybe we take a couple of days to do this. Maybe we can do it, like I said, in 15 minutes. But we look at that paper. We say, okay, I have these things in my life. I am self-defined as a good person. I have worked on my spiritual journey. I have worked on my spiritual path. I may even be in a role of significant responsibility within a New Thought organization. But if I'm experiencing these things, then I have work to do. And we all really do have work at some level to do. There's very few people that have come through and lived this life free, and some of those people we've known, like the master teacher or the Buddha. But there's a lot of them that kind of came through under the radar, so to speak. But they came through and they influenced people. And ultimately, what I want to talk about is when we take the time to evaluate, self-evaluate, and we realize, okay, there is this thing called race consciousness, and it believes in disease, and I'm experienced disease personally or in my family, and what do I do about that? Well, Holmes says that we have to deny the reality of the disease. New Thought says we have to deny the reality of the disease, but you know what? When it's personal, when it's real close, sometimes that's hard to do. But we also have to understand that, and this is something that sometimes people make a mistake when they begin to start treating. They think that it's faith that is the ultimate factor as we go through our treatments. It's really not. It's an embodiment of the understanding of truth. Now, faith will help us get there. Belief will help us get there. But ultimately, it's getting to that point in our beingness, in our imagination, our understanding of reality, that truth is void of things that separate us, that limit us from the divine good. There are people, and we call them practitioners, that are able to do this at varying degrees, sometimes stronger in some areas of life than others. I mean, let's be honest. Some people, they have work within their own personal stuff to do, but they've got it solid over here. And if you're part of a religious science organization or even an independent center or church, you utilize your practitioners and allow your practitioners to demonstrate the strengths of what they do, particularly for you, because the hardest thing to do is to treat for ourselves, because we know ourselves so much more intimately that sometimes we tend to cut ourselves off at the knees and as we do our treatment, because we know things. So let's put that aside. There is a power and a presence in the universe for good, and we can use it. We got to believe it, and we got to use it. But within that power, it acts without volition. It just acts. And race, the human race, has generated, if you will, a historical repository of a lot of not so good stuff that still influences itself in the world today. I'm kind of a student of history in a way, and I like to look back, and you can see how humanity has grown in consciousness. Enlightenment has become greater and greater in the human expression. But you still see so much in the world, and you go, how can that be in today's life and times? Well, it's there because race consciousness is there. But we can clear a path through that to our ultimate good. when we are honest enough to work on it. Out of chaos, we can create order in our lives. But we have to work at it. And work is not, like I said in the beginning, it's not so much a hard thing, but it's a thing that requires consistency, persistence. It requires building our belief, building our faith, and something that Holmes called practice. And if you read much of his teaching material, practice is one of the things that he stresses is right up there at the top, more than anything else. Practice, practice, practice. Because you can only know what you've demonstrated to be true. And that, what you've been unable to demonstrate, may or may not be true. And that's out of, I believe, and I probably paraphrase it, I think that's the how to use it section of the introduction, The Science of Mind. But the idea is that which you've done, you have no doubt. That which you haven't done may be subject to doubt. If you're looking to make changes in your life, you can't afford to allow yourself to live in a place where doubt can have sway within your heart, your mind, and your beingness. And again, that's why we have practitioners. We go to practitioners. And they can believe for us what we can't believe for ourselves. They can know the truth for us at the level that we don't know yet for ourselves. But ours is our journey. It is a spiritual journey. And I've often said that it's a journey that is, in a sense, it's a skill, and that's true. The skill is learning the spiritual tools and learning to apply them in a skillful way, if you will. But I think I may not have placed enough emphasis in that description on the other aspect of that, and that is the spiritual experience part. And we need that spiritual experience. So as we practice, as we develop the skills, the end result of developing that skill is the experience, and the experience is the spiritualness that we're seeking to experience in our life. The greater that we have that understanding of experiencing that experience, the more solid, if you will, we will be in our belief system. I think it's time for my next break, so I'm going to pick up when we come back. We'll start with belief system and we'll move forward. See you then.
Prepare to be amazed by the magic of Elder. Kyle Elder is a fantastic entertainer who has been studying magic for over 20 years. Book Kyle and the Magic of Elder for your event, large or small. Kyle will make you laugh and mesmerize you with his magic. For more information or a free quote, visit magicofelder.com or call 559-917-4543.
At Miracle Realty, we've been providing premier professional residential sales and property management in residential and commercial property for years. We manage single-family homes, condominiums, apartment buildings, commercial buildings, office space, and much more. No matter what experience level you have in property management, Miracle Realty strives to make your experience as stress-free as possible. Serving Madera and the surrounding areas, we use the latest technology and provide top-notch service. We're a trusted and reliable name in residential sales and property management with the experience to answer any questions or complications that might come up. Give us a call today or visit us online for more information.
Voir dire, An Oath to Tell and Seek the Truth by Santiago Camarena, depicts the vicious cycle of drugs, crime, and incarceration. It argues that the media, politics, and our laws systematically contribute to this cycle. Get your copy of Voir dire at voirdirestory.com.
CentralValleyTalk.com.
Welcome back to New Thought Talk. I'm your host, the Reverend Steve Walling from the Spiritual Awareness Center in Fresno, California. We've been talking about this thing called race consciousness today and how it can and often does influence not only us, but the events that surround us in life. I'm going to read a little bit further. I know I'm going to get back to this idea of personal belief, but I want to read a little bit further what Holmes has to say. He says, just as each person, place, or thing has a subjective atmosphere or remembrance, so each town, city, or nation has its individual atmosphere. Some towns are bustling with life and action, while others seem dead. Some are filled with a spirit of culture, while others are filled with a spirit of commerce. This is the result of the mentalities of those who live in such places. Just as a city has its atmosphere, so does the entire nation. The combined thought of those who inhabit a nation creates a national consciousness, which we speak of as the psychology of that people. Our beliefs create our reality. It's done unto us as we believe. If you look at what's going on in the world, let's say, particularly in our country here today, we obviously believe in a lot of chaos, don't we? We believe in a lot of unhappiness, at least if you watch the 5 o'clock news, which I have managed to extricate myself from, and most any other source of news either. And that doesn't make me an ostrich with my head in the sand. I ardently and fervently work to create a better world, but I start with myself, creating my connectedness with Source at an ever higher level, allowing myself to be a light, allowing myself to experience God's good in my life, and allowing myself to be present in each and every moment. And you know, the thing is as we do this, and this is something that you can do, you begin to change things, and it's amazing. You change things that you're not even aware of. Sometimes it's kind of like that butterfly effect, and don't laugh it off, because that's a very powerful concept of energy and how energy moves and creates things far disproportionate to the initial impulse or input. And so we create by our beliefs, but we have to know where we're at within our beliefs. And if we look at our individual life and we see, like I said in the previous segment, where things are at, we've made our list, say, okay, it's time to work on that. Well, how do we work on that, for crying out loud? How do I work on something that I had no conscious input into my mind, and yet somehow that influence is there? That's where our daily spiritual practices come in. That's where daily affirmations come in. And that's where an ongoing reevaluation of our life experience becomes very important. As we begin to create in our minds with feeling, with energy, with beingness, that which we want to be. And oftentimes this is glossed over, but you are what you believe, you can create your own reality, law of attraction, all this good, happy stuff. But it's a lot more than that for the individual. It is a process. It is a way of life, a way of beingness. And it's a way of life that, the inertia as we first attempt to get started sometimes can be immense, because there's so much inner resistance, so much within us that wants to push back. And oftentimes we can get discouraged very easily. One of the things that I teach people that I work with is the idea of how wonderful failure is. And that may sound kind of strange, but if you begin to look at the concept of failure as a stepping stone to an eventuality of succeeding, you can shift your perspective. Yes, we work, and yes, we don't achieve, and yes, we try to attempt to create our spiritual experience, and no, nothing happens. But the thing is, we keep working at it, and this is why I like the metaphor of a skill, because if you've ever attempted to play an instrument, or if you've ever attempted to achieve a level of skill within a physical activity of any kind, whether it's a sport or dancing, or it doesn't make any difference. You practice. And as you practice, you got to think about each move and its consciousness, and you're a little, kind of clunky in your movement. And the more you practice, seemingly you get a little bit better. The more you practice, it may get a little bit smoother. But all of a sudden, at one day, when you are in the middle of practice, you realize you're in it. You're being it. You're not thinking about it. It's become a part of you. At that point, particularly if you're playing an instrument, you experience the amazingness of making music. Not just playing the instrument, but making music. And it's the same way as we do our spiritual practices. We develop this spiritual skill. We work at it. We seem a little clunky. We seem to fail. But every time we fail, ultimately we're moving a little bit forward. The thing is don't stop with the first failure or the second. Fail 100 times, but come back 101 times, until at some point you realize that you're not practicing, that you are the music. And that music is spirit within you, moving you. And as you do, then you'll know. You'll know, and you'll know that you know that you're at that level of experience. Now, that doesn't make you a master. I'm not talking about being a master. I'm talking about those early steps on our journey that each and every one of us can do, but we have to participate. It's something that no one can do for us. Your practitioners, your ministers, your coaches, people can give you a lot of information. The books, the videos, the movies, a lot of information. But until you make that inner connection yourself, it's all just between your ears. It's all just, well, it sounds good. Boy, that's something I'd really like to be involved with. Or maybe I involve myself enough that I show up on Sundays and I take a couple classes, but that's the extent of my involvement. To make the music of your life that God has created you to do, you have to do. And that's where a lot of people, they separate themselves. They like the idea. It feels good. New thought is so powerful. The understanding that there's just one. It's not one with, there's just one. And we're all a demonstration, a manifestation, an expression of that one in our life, moment to moment, with every breath that we take. How amazing that is, that God is, and God is all that is, or spirit, or God is, however it is that you have to relate to it, or choose to relate to it. But there's just this. And as you begin to sense the awesomeness of that, not in an intellectual level, but in a beingness level, then you can begin to make moves into areas where heretofore you just didn't have what it took. It's the simplest way I can explain it. And a lot of people don't get to that point because it does take consistency. If you meditate on Monday and you don't meditate till the following Monday, if you affirm on Thursday and you only do one affirmation every Thursday, maybe you'll make it in your lifetime. I can't judge that one way or another, but chances are you're not going to get there. But when you begin to dedicate yourself to it, and you do it, and you do it, they say that it takes 21 days. I don't know if it's 21 days. I think that kind of is a good rule of thumb to start with, but if you get to day 21 and you're still working it and you haven't got it, don't stop. Maybe it's day 42 or 63. Don't stop. The reason why I tell you don't stop is because what you're seeking to achieve is there. When you're seeking to learn how to play an instrument, the music, the real music, not the notes or the doing the scales or whatever, but the real music is there. And we can see that. We know when a musician has got to that point to where they're no longer consciously struggling through the music or consciously directing themselves through the music, but they become one with the music. And that's ultimately where we want to get ourselves in mind. We want to become in our mind. When I say one with, I got to be careful because I don't want you to think that we're separate from, because that's not my point. When I say we're one with the music, in other words, the music that's here becomes us. That which is within us expresses itself through us. And maybe that's about the closest way I can get to it. But I know that for each of us, it's available. We can do this. I'm going to go on a little bit more. Holmes says, the subjective mind being universal, the history of the race is written in the mental atmosphere of the globe on which we live. That is, everything which has ever happened on this planet has left its imprint on the walls of time. And could we walk down their corridors and read the writings, we should be reading the race history. This should seem simple when we realize that the vibrations of the human voice can be perceived and preserved on a receptive photograph. Now, this is back in the day when they were using phonographs, but you want a CD, DVD, MP3, whatever. It doesn't make any difference. Put it in today's terms if you can't quite relate to what he's talking about. on a phonograph disc or a sound film and reproduced at will. If we were to impress one of these discs or a strip of sound film and lay it away for years, properly protecting it, it would still reproduce these vibrations. It is not difficult then to understand how the walls of time may be hung with the pictures of human events, and how one who sees these pictures may read race history. There is a tendency on the part of all of us to reproduce the accumulated subjective experience of the human race. In other words, we're immersed in it. We can't separate ourselves from it. But we don't have to express it in our life. We don't have to do that. But if we go through life and we turn a blind eye to the fact that we're doing that, what happens is, we get all excited about Science of Mind, New Thought. We get all excited about creating our reality. We get all excited about demonstrating and manifesting, and then we run up against that wall of limitation, or that wall of chaos, or that wall of lack or hurt. Or we find that in a moment we were triggered by something, and the expression that we expressed is something that we didn't believe we were capable of. And yet, it's there. And it's there in all of us at some level. That's our truth. When we know our truth, then we can address it. And when we know our truth and address it, we can free ourselves from the bondage that it is. And speaking of freeing ourselves, I'm going to free myself at this moment, and we're going to take our last commercial break, and I'll see you when we come back.
Linda Lee Kane is an author of fantasies, thrillers, contemporary fiction, and children's books. Order a book by Linda Lee Kane on Amazon or on lindaleekane.com. Call Paul Bonander of Bonander Real Estate to buy this beautiful 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom home at 3486 Mecca Avenue in Clovis. Call 559-246-6731 for all your real estate needs. The Saga of Bridget and Amanda by Carol Love Forbes brings to life the struggles of historical women in early America. Find The Saga of Bridget and Amanda on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and order your copy today.
CentralValleyTalk.com.
Welcome back, New Thought Talk. I am your host, the Reverend Steve Walling from the Spiritual Awareness Center located in Fresno, California, the heart of the San Joaquin Valley. Boy, it's really beautiful here right now. I live about 50 miles from the studio, and I drive down through forest, and I drive down through vineyards, and there's just orchards and all sorts of stuff, and it's absolutely incredibly beautiful. And as I make that drive, I realize the power, the creativeness of the divine principle in all its different forms. And its base level beauty is what it is. And that's really awesome. But this is our last segment, so we don't have a lot of time. And before I close out, I want to go back to something here, tie this in. And that is the purpose of the Science of Mind from the Science of Mind textbook. And Holmes writes, he says, the whole purpose of the Science of Mind is to reconcile the apparent separation of the spiritual world, which must be perfect, with the material world, which appears imperfect. The spiritual world is the cause of the material, and we are spiritual beings governed by mental law. Only that world can appear to us which we mentally perceive. Man's experience is the logical outcome of his inner vision. His horizon is limited to the confines of his own consciousness. Whenever this consciousness lacks a true perspective, its outward expression will lack proper harmony. This is why we are taught to be transformed by the renewing of our minds, since no one lives by proxy, but each unto himself. Every individual must make the test in his or her own soul. And once again, that's Holmes telling us we got to do the work ourselves. It can't be done for us. We can't live by proxy. We demonstrate in our own world at the level of our belief and understanding. And if our belief and understanding has kept us limited in our life experience, I have to ask the question, why? Why be limited? Why should we choose to be limited? If we don't know that there's more than what we're experiencing, that's one thing. And there's a lot of people in the world that live at that level. But if we do know, if we have been, let's say, enlightened to a point where we realize that there's something better available to us, why do we not avail ourselves? And oftentimes, and I discussed that earlier in the show, people attempt to, and they find failure. And once again, don't let failure be your measuring stick. Just let it be a step, one step on your journey. But make it a step that you learn from. If you've attempted something and you've failed, sit down with that piece of paper again. See what you might be able to realize. You know, if you don't realize it within yourself, see what you can realize that life is mirroring back to you. It's an awesome thing, life, and it's sometimes rather daunting. But, and you've heard me say this many times before, but, I love saying it. I'm going to say it again. The things that we think and do are limited by what we fail to notice. Think about that. The things that we think, which are creative, and do, which are our actions, are limited by what we fail to notice. How do we fail to notice? Where do we fail to notice? Not out there. We fail to notice within our own consciousness. And because we fail to notice that we fail to notice, there's little that we can do to change. So the chaos we live in is the chaos that's there. And we don't see a way out, just more chaos, which generally leads to emotional upset, anger, angst, worry, all sorts of stuff, more chaos. Until we notice how failing to notice has shaped our thoughts and deeds. When we notice how failing to notice has shaped our thoughts and deeds, you don't have to be in that spot. If you understand that there is something called race consciousness, if you look into your life and you see something less than the divine principle, and if you know and understand that you cannot be separated from your source, that the gift of your life was given long before you ever took your first breath, along with everything that you need to experience this life in a whole, perfect, and complete way, and the fact that you're not doesn't mean that you're less than, doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. It means that maybe there's things that we fail to notice. But not only have we failed to notice them as individuals, we have failed to notice them as a human race. And that's become a major part of the human race judgment upon itself. But it can be changed, and it is being changed. But it's being changed not by governments, it's not being changed by laws, it's being changed by individuals. Individuals seeking to align themselves with divine principle. Individuals that see and seek the greater good, and they know that that greater good has to start first within themselves. When they're willing to lay down their judgments, when they're willing to love their neighbor as they love themselves, when they're willing to realize that they are God expressed as them and realize that they are to love God with all that they are. When they realize that there are teachers that have walked this path before them and have left messages or teachings or books or consciousness for them to follow. Because you see, race consciousness holds not only negative, but it also holds the positive. And sometimes in our seeking, we find that positive just in that moment, in that inspiration. It's not a book, it's not a teacher, it's not a video show. It's just that moment within ourselves when the realization takes place. When we begin to know and know that we know. There is a power and a presence for good, or a presence and a power for good, however you want to state that. That is available to each and every one of us, that we can use. When we do have faith, when we do have conviction, when we do have belief, and we do create within ourselves an understanding of the truth of who we are. And as we seek to see that understanding, as we seek to experience that understanding, as we seek to do that, we will express that understanding in our life demonstration. And things change. And as we change our life, we change the world. That was what Ernest Holmes believed. You can find that written throughout a lot of his stuff. He didn't talk about leading the procession to change the world. He talked about changing the world through yourself, through himself. That's the power of New Thought. That's the power of religious science. That's the power of truth. That's the power of love. It's the power of divine principle. That's my belief anyway. I hope you've enjoyed today's talk. I've been working around some of these things because there's a lot of this stuff going on in the world, but we don't have to experience it. And although you may look at the world and say there's just so much that it's going to take drastic steps to change, I'm here to tell you it doesn't. It just takes one little change, and that one little change takes place within each one of us. Finding our truth, aligning ourselves with our truth, allowing the love of the divine principle to express itself through us into life. And then life changes. And as life changes at that level, so does race consciousness. Amazing, isn't it? It's beautiful. I love it. I'm glad to be here. I give thanks every day for this wonderful life that divine principle has given to me that I can express, and I hope you do also, because it's been a great day. Like I say, I hope you enjoyed the show. As you go through the week, the light of God surrounds you, the love of God enfolds you. The power of God protects you, and the presence of God, it watches over you, because no matter where you are, God is there. And if God is there, no matter what you think, the reality is all is well. Blessings, my friends. I'll see you next week.
Linda Lee Kane is an author of fantasies, thrillers, contemporary fiction, and children's books. Order a book by Linda Lee Kane on Amazon or on lindaleekane.com.
CentralValleyTalk.com